Well, hi Acadiana, I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. It is time for Let's Talk Tropics on this Tuesday morning. It really is a pretty day outside. We might still have a couple of afternoon thunderstorms over the southern sections, but 90 degrees here in Lafayette, and that heat index is only 98, so it almost feels like wintertime around Acadiana. Really not a bad day at all. Well, we've got a lot to talk about here. As many of you know, the models have been rather active over the past week or so. And now the National Hurricane Center is also monitoring a disturbance, and on top of that, the Colorado State University team has also done an update on their hurricane season forecast. So we're going to go through all of those numbers here in just a second. But as I was telling you, it really is a pretty day across Acadiana. A lot of sunshine out there. Temperatures are summer-like, but with some slightly lower dew points, it doesn't feel terrible out there. So let's go ahead and get to the numbers first of all. And I want to start with the Colorado State University forecast. And this is as of this morning. This was just released a couple of hours ago. And the team there is keeping their numbers unchanged from the April forecast. Now remember, this is one of the first hurricane season forecasts that came out and was indicating 23 named storms potentially over the course of the hurricane season, very similar to the NOAA forecast that came out back in May, where they were going anywhere up to 25 named systems. But there's a lot of things that went into this forecast over the wintertime and going into April. And now that I'm looking at these numbers virtually unchanged, it does give me an indication that the scientists there are still looking at several factors such as La Nina and above normal water temperatures. And therefore, even though we haven't seen any tropical activity here in the first week and a half of hurricane season, we're still looking at some pretty high numbers. So let's get into the thinking first of all. And we're going to start with La Nina. And for those of you that are out there, you probably have heard of El Nino and La Nina. They're basically the opposites. El Nino is when you have warming waters over the Pacific, and La Nina is the opposite, where you have cooling waters over the Pacific. And a lot of people are like, well, why do we care about the Pacific when the hurricanes we worry about are over in the Atlantic? Well, when you tend to get some of those cooling waters out there, some different things do happen to change around the world. It kind of shifts some different weather patterns. But second thing that we're looking on here is the very, very warm waters. This is the water temperature anomaly. So anything in red and the darker red is indicating water temperatures that are above normal for this time of the year. And then there are a few areas where there's some slightly cooler temperatures there along the Gulf Stream. Now this area is usually relatively warm anyway with the Gulf Stream. So having the waters down just a few degrees there is not that unusual, but you can see the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean Sea, and pretty much all of the Atlantic is looking well above normal on those water temperatures. So over the next several months, there's a lot of computer models that have been predicting that we were going to go from an El Nino phase back to a La Nina. And La Nina does affect the Atlantic hurricane season. It can actually help more tropical systems to develop. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. But you can see where we are right now. Earlier in the year, we were looking still at possibility of some El Nino conditions kind of sticking around. That's here in this area shaded in red. That's April, May, June. So that's where we are right now, finishing that. The May, June, July was starting to see an indication of more of a La Nina, and then as you go further and further out into the hurricane season there, you see that those blue lines come out a lot more, so that is indicating that there's a better chance that we will be moving into a La Nina period. Farther down the road, unfortunately, that is July, August, September, October, September, October, November, so that's the peak of the hurricane season. Now, getting back to why do we care about cool waters in the Pacific? Well, when that happens, you end up getting fewer hurricanes on the Pacific side because you have strong vertical wind shear, but you end up with more hurricanes on the Atlantic side because this phenomenon tends to weaken vertical wind shear and trade winds. Now, what does that really mean? Well, in the case of a developing tropical system, such as what we're seeing here on the bottom, if you have that strong vertical wind shear coming in, something that wants to develop here at the bottom, this is the surface, this is the ocean, and this is the atmosphere up at the top, but a low pressure area might develop here, but the middle levels of the low pressure area might extend in a different area. It might be it's kind of stacked in different places. So you don't get that vertically stacked type of system that can strengthen. Unlike when you have no vertical wind shear up here on the top, not only do you get this very nice vertically stacked center of circulation, but all of the thunderstorms that build around in those rings around the hurricane can still continue to build because you don't have any vertical wind shear coming in to blow the tops off. So lower vertical wind shear can allow tropical systems to develop easier. And if they can develop easier, you would probably have more numbers of total tropical systems. And of course, if you have more numbers, there's a better chance that you could get hit. So let's go ahead and look at what's going on right now across the Atlantic Ocean. And what I wanted to bring up here was this pretty significant tropical wave that's about halfway across the Atlantic Ocean. This is a little bit unusual this early in the season, not terribly unusual, but that's a fairly strong tropical wave that's going to continue to move off toward the west and will be affecting the Windward Islands about maybe 4 or 5 days down the road. As we look at the broader Atlantic page here, again, you can see that fairly strong tropical wave that's out here in the Atlantic Ocean, but you've got another tropical wave that's right about here, another one right about here, and then you got one that's crossed over and has moved over into the Pacific. As we look at the Caribbean satellite, there isn't a lot going on there, but you'll probably notice some more of that moisture that's starting to build over the northern part of the Caribbean and the western part of the Caribbean as well. Now, the area over the western Caribbean yesterday was pretty much socked in with a lot of tropical moisture, and that has now started to move on into the Bay of Campeche, or rather the Yucatan Channel, and into the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, which now brings us to that tropical disturbance that has now been identified by the National Hurricane Center. So that tropical disturbance area is going to be right about in here. So over the western or the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, if I can get this telestrator to work properly, that's the area that we're watching, and most indications are that it'll be traveling off toward the northeast. But this is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. As most of you know, you're probably thinking, well, what about that thing that was supposed to be south of Louisiana next weekend, not in the next couple of days? Well, this might be just one piece of energy that's coming across there, but you'll also notice that in the lower levels, you just got this tremendous amount of moisture that's still coming in from the Caribbean Sea, kind of feeding that area, and that is a trend that we think that's going to continue here for the next several days. So National Hurricane Center indicating there's a slight chance for some development there over the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, but a couple of the models have this piece of energy moving across Florida and into the Atlantic Ocean, where it may have a chance for some development out there. So again, a lot of you are probably saying, wait a minute, all the models are saying the Gulf of Mexico. Going to get to that because this is over the next few days. And what we've been looking at in the tropical models is actually next weekend into early next week, so farther down the road. So let's look at that disturbance. This is where it is right now off the Florida coast. And some of the computer models are indicating that it should slide over the peninsula of Florida and into the Atlantic Ocean. So this is very similar to the National Hurricane Center's thinking. The Hurricane Hunter aircraft, they have no plans to go out there today. And if this low is over Florida, they would certainly have no plans to go out there for tomorrow. But I did look at the plan of the day for tomorrow, and they're indicating maybe they'll go out on Thursday to an area out here if indeed we see some development of that particular system. So let's go through all the models now. We're going to go back 24 hours, and this is the model that I showed you yesterday during Let's Talk Tropics. This would have been the newest model yesterday. And when we talk about the models and going from model run to model run, one of the big things you'll probably hear a lot is consistency. We want to see if there's any big changes or big sways between model run to model run. So yesterday there was kind of an indication that maybe a low pressure area was going to develop over the Western Gulf. Good feed of moisture coming in from the Pacific, good feed of moisture coming in from the Caribbean Sea, and then surging right here into the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. We've seen this set up now in the models for about a week or so. So let's move forward to the next model. This was yesterday afternoon, early evening. So you see there's not much of a change there. Not anything that looks significant, but there's still a ton of moisture that's over the Gulf of Mexico. The one that ran late yesterday evening, also showing a lot of moisture still. And again, I want to point out too, that this is not for the next couple of days. This is early next week. So this is actually coming in about midnight, early Monday morning. Something else to point out here, remember the disturbance that's over here? Well, this particular model thinks it might be a tropical depression in about a week or so, moving out into the Atlantic Ocean. And the Euro model also does the same thing, by the way. So let's look at this morning's model. Again, there's still kind of a low pressure area over the western part of the Gulf of Mexico, maybe about right there. A lot of heavy rain, maybe over southeastern Louisiana. This is this morning's run. And again, the time frame on here is very, very early Monday morning of next week. Now, here's the latest model that just came down. It just finished a little while ago. This is not really showing any kind of a closed low pressure area or a center of circulation, but it is still showing quite a bit of moisture over the western Gulf of Mexico. But I want to direct your eyes down here. And this is something that kind of popped up in several model runs, not just the GFS, but also the Euro model, of maybe a low pressure area in the southern Bay of Campeche, or maybe there in the Pacific Ocean in the Gulf of Tehuantepec. And I will show you that, first of all, we are still seeing a lot of consistency in the models with moisture coming in from the Pacific, moisture coming in from the tropical Atlantic and the Caribbean as well, and kind of pooling here over the Gulf of Mexico for an extended period of time. But let's look at the Euro model. And again, it is pretty consistent with the GFS. But I also want you to notice that it is starting to indicate maybe some lowering pressures either in the Pacific or possibly in the Bay of Campeche. So it's probably going to be a trough or something right here. But the Euro model kind of biting a little bit, just like the GFS is as well. So do we have anything to worry about in the near future? No, but it is something that we need to watch out for. And if this scenario were to come, I think we're going to be looking at more of a rain event rather than a wind event. So flooding rains could be the potential, but this isn't going to be until the early part of next week. So we don't have to worry too much about that. We'll just kind of watch the disturbance off to the east and see if it does cross over Florida and head into the Atlantic. Now, there are some things that are in a tropical system's favor this time of the year, especially this year. The extreme water temperatures that we're seeing here over the Gulf of Mexico, 28, 29, 30 degrees Celsius. That's anywhere between about 83 and 87, 88 degrees water temperature. And all you need is 80 degrees to sustain a tropical system. So that covers the entire Gulf, that covers the entire Caribbean, and generally a large part of the development zone over the western part of the Atlantic. The tropical cyclone heat potential remains quite high as well. This measures not just the surface temperatures, but also how deep that warm water goes. So if a tropical system were trying to develop in any of these areas, they would still be able to turn up some very warm water with a lot of heat potential, energy basically for a system to work with. But I did want to point out this area right here. We call this the loop current, and this is over the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. This has played a big part in rapidly intensifying tropical storms and hurricanes over the past 20 years or so. In the description, I went ahead and put a Wikipedia article link that talks about the loop current and how it affected a couple of very well-named storms back in 2005. You know the names, Katrina and Rita, and that loop current played a big part. So if you want to read more about the loop current and the effects it can have on tropical systems, the link is in the description below, so you can check that out at your leisure. So let's look at the wind shear right now. Wind shear is one of the things that we look at that tends to prevent tropical storm development. Now remember, we've got that disturbance right here in the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, but all around it you got high wind shear, so it's not in a very good environment for tropical development. Could it become a tropical depression? Maybe, but not very likely, and I don't think it would be anything stronger than that. And it would be moving out into an area in the Atlantic Ocean that still has some fairly high wind shear. So let's talk about the other trough that was possibly developing over the western part of the Gulf of Mexico. So we're going to jump ahead here to early next week. So this is back to that midnight, 1 a.m.-ish time frame of Monday morning of next week. And with a trough possibly developing in the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico, there would be an area of some slightly lower wind shear. So there could be some potential for development there, but you can see there's wind shear pretty much all around it, so it wouldn't have a great chance, which is why I think the models are still kind of backing off any tropical development, or at the very least developing something extremely weak, such as a tropical depression or maybe a low-end tropical storm. But these are the areas that we tend to watch during the month of June, and where the disturbance is right now and where anything else is potentially going to develop. According to the computer models, they're kind of all in this area during the month of June. Now, not all systems develop here, but I would say about 80% of them develop in the Gulf, the Western Caribbean, or the Western Atlantic there over to near the Bahamas. So not great areas that you want to see tropical moisture, lowering pressures, and lower wind shear either, because those are the combination for tropical systems to develop. Fortunately, during the month of June, we don't have a lot of activity. It's usually 1 or 2 named storms. Now, I know we haven't had anything yet, and we didn't have any preseason storms this year. So there are a few people I've seen the rumblings on social media, oh, the hurricane season's a bust. There isn't any new tropical activity. Well, we're only 11 days in, and we could still have a busy season even if we don't have any tropical activity during the month of June, and we still have 2/3 of June to go. So, but June typically is very similar to July's activity. In fact, sometimes in July we see a little bit of a lower tick of the activity, and then things really start to ramp up into August, and the general saying is the peak of hurricane season is at or around September 10th, but activity stays kind of high all the way through mid-October for us here along the Gulf Coast, and then the activity really starts to drop off as you get into November. So, as I said, there's nothing to worry about here in the near-term future. We will watch that tropical disturbance, and we'll wait to see what the hurricane hunters do. Right now, they don't have a plan to fly out there, but there's a potential that they might go out there on Thursday, so we'll watch out for that. And as far as this other trough that the models have been hooking up or kind of hooking onto for the last 7 or 8 days or whatever, There still is some potential there, but at this point, I think it's going to be a heavy rain event possibly for us here along the northern Gulf Coast. So again, this is a great time to do all of your hurricane preparation now, gathering the supplies that you need while everything is readily available at the local stores. Well, that's the end of our Let's Talk Tropics. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, please like this video and also subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications. That way you know when the next Let's Talk Tropics, or if we do any severe weather coverage, or our daily morning show, Acadiana Weather Today, that gives you your daily forecast and how it's going to affect your day. I hope you have a great Tuesday. It looks like it's still turning out to be a pretty nice afternoon out there. Get out and enjoy it if you can. I will see you on Wednesday morning.